tell you the same thing. I can do it. If it's good enough for the senior, it's good enough for me. So, did you ever hear the Jewish definition of an optimist? It's the woman who puts on her shoes when the rabbi says, "and in conclusion." So there's a story going around about a man trying to cross the street. However, when he steps off the curb, a car comes screaming around the corner, driving right at him. So the man walks quickly, tries to get to the other side, but the car changes lanes and continues to drive right at him. So then he turns around to try to go back the other direction, and the car changes lanes again, coming right at him. By now, the guy's so freaked out, he just freezes right in the middle of the street. The car comes screaming right at him. At the last moment, just turns, stops right next to him. The driver rolls down the window, and behold, it's a squirrel driving the car. And the squirrel says to the man, "See, it's not as easy as it looks, is it?" Well, actually, nothing seems particularly easy these days. We're living in a world seems like it's gone mad in so many ways. Fear, anxiety, insecurity, a rising sense of personal vulnerability, that the safe and protected world we thought we lived in could be turned upside down at any moment, and I'm not even talking about the election. Our entire society is experiencing a rising xenophobia where every stranger, especially the hijab-wearing kind, becomes a potential enemy to be feared, and it's literally driving us crazy as a society and individually, fearful and crazed. Now, it's not that there aren't things worth being afraid of. There always are, there always have been, there always will be. It's just that, as I see it, we spend way too much of our time being afraid of the wrong things and not paying enough attention to the right things. For example, now, obviously, more people are afraid of, say, being hurt or killed by terrorists today than falling downstairs. More people are certainly afraid of getting hurt or killed by terrorists than getting attacked by animals, right? But the crazy part of this is, as a matter of fact, and I actually do mean fact, according to the Center for Disease Control, more fatalities do occur each year from falling downstairs than occur from terrorism. And many more fatalities occur each year from animal attacks than from terrorism. Or how about this? According to the CDC, you are 35,000 times more likely to die from heart disease than from a terrorist attack. 6,000 times more likely to die from obesity, and since there are some 80,000 deaths each year attributed to excessive alcohol use, you are 4,000 times more likely to drink yourself to death than to die from terrorism. But, of course, most of us are still a lot more afraid of terrorists than a bottle of vodka. We live in this crazy time, and I've long been convinced that the hypersensitivity of our fears is stoked primarily by what we call the 24-hour news cycle that relentlessly bombards us over and over and over again every time there is any tragedy of any type anywhere in the world. Someone is killed in Bangladesh, and I see it on my phone 5 minutes later, sometimes while it's actually happening. So tonight I want to remind you of another truth. And this one could possibly save your life and the lives of your loved ones, and who knows, maybe even change your life forever. Here, my friends, is the cold, absolute, undeniable truth about where your fears and worries and anxieties probably ought to be focused. As if you're truly worried about your safety and the safety of your children and loved ones, here is their single greatest source of danger. Without question, practically every expert in the world agrees that the single most dangerous place for you to be in the entire world is in your car, period. I know you, my car, you laugh and brush it off, but really it's the truth, whether you want to admit it or not. More people die every single day from auto accidents than from all the terrorism in the entire world for a whole year, really. 30,000 men, women, and children died in the United States alone last year in their cars. Unfortunately, I know that none of these kinds of statistics tend to matter to people at all. None of them will probably make you worry any less or feel any better or be less afraid for your own safety or that of your children, even if they are true, which they are. We just see too much and we hear too much and we know too much, and so we worry too much. Look, we're Jews mostly, and so we love to worry. It's practically redundant to say Jew and worry in the same sentence. So if you're Jewish or Jewish, married to a Jew, living with a Jew, friends who were Jewish, thinking about becoming a Jew, I'm sure you worry too. It's like you probably know that one of the oldest jokes in the world is the famous Jewish telegram, "Start worrying, details to follow." Okay, maybe you didn't know. I know my lovely wife, Dee Dee, believes very strongly in worrying. She's always telling me she worries about everything because every time she worries, nothing happens. Maybe you've heard there's a classic Orthodox Jewish story in which the man comes home from synagogue and excitedly tells his wife, "Oh my God, the rabbi said in shul that the Messiah is coming any day and the Messiah will take us all to Israel." The wife instantly becomes hysterical. "Oh no, that would be terrible," she says. "It took years till we could finally afford to move into this good neighborhood and buy the house we wanted, and now we spent a fortune fixing it up and decorating it. I don't want the Messiah to come and take us away." Okay, don't worry so much, the husband says. "We survived Pharaoh, we survived Haman, we even survived Hitler, and with God's help, we'll survive the Messiah too." Well, we have survived wars and earthquakes and floods and fires and riots and terrorism. And I understand being afraid of radical Muslim extremists. But frankly, what we should be most afraid of is other drivers. When 49 people died and 35 more were injured in that horrible nightclub attack in Orlando, it was understandably all over the news for days. The cover story, everywhere you looked. Well, over 1.5 million people are injured every year in cars, and 30,000 people dying every year in car accidents means 84 people dying every single day, 4 every hour, someone every 18 minutes. You're worried about your children? Traffic accidents are the leading cause of death for teenagers. Leading cause of death for teenagers, 3/4 of whom are young men, half of whom are not wearing seatbelts. 30 years ago, the very first funeral I ever did as a rabbi here at KI was for a 17-year-old killed while speeding down Palisades Drive, who was distracted for just a moment and crossed the center line, hitting another car head-on. There have been way too many of those over the years for all of us. Look, everyone knows that texting and while you're driving is dangerous. Oh, and as an aside, maybe a sign of the times, it used to be that on the back of big burly motorcycle riders with those big black leather jackets, he would either say Hell's Angels or Harley Davidson. The other day, literally, Dee Dee and I were driving in Westwood, and right in front of us was this big burly motorcycle driver with a big black leather jacket, and on the back in bright gold reflecting letters it said, "Texting kills." He knew what to be afraid of, trust me. Anyway, everyone knows that driving while you're talking holding a phone is also dangerous and distracting, but most people think that as long as they're using a hands-free system, they're fine. Unfortunately, AAA discovered that voice-controlled car systems, which are getting more and more popular, are also very distracting. In fact, drivers who use hands-free systems to, let's say, dial or change music in their cars remain distracted, according to this study, up to 27 seconds after talking to the system. Well, how much damage can 27 seconds do? Okay, so at only 25 miles an hour, and how many of you drive only 25 miles an hour, a driver distracted for 27 seconds travels nearly the length of 3 football fields. 3 football fields in 27 seconds. I know this is fascinating, but by now you're probably asking yourselves, what does any of this have to do with Rosh Hashanah and the high holidays? Glad you asked. Have you ever had a class that changed your life? So I did. It wasn't in elementary school, it wasn't in junior high school or high school, it wasn't a college course, it wasn't even in rabbinic school, or the courses I did for my PhD. It wasn't a class in ancient Jewish wisdom or spiritual meditation or even how to win friends and influence people, which of course I did take. No, the most powerful class that I ever took that absolutely changed my life, I took just a few months ago. It was called traffic school. Seriously. Now, many of you know that Dee Dee and I both like speedy cars. There's a pun in there, but I won't go for it. For years, she only drove Corvettes and then a Stealth, and now we both drive Subaru WRX STIs. Really lovely, speedy sports cars. So for Rosh Hashanah this year, I have a confession. It's kind of what you're supposed to do. I've been driving fast. I've been driving too fast for 50 years. And like most of you, most of the time I get away with it. But a few months ago, driving too fast on San Vicente, I got a speeding ticket. So I went to traffic school. I admit, not for the first time. But this time, it changed my life. I took the class online, which gave me hours to sit by myself and read about driving and dying, and also reflect on the person I become every time I get behind the wheel of a car, and what that says about who I am and my willingness to take responsibility for my relationships with every other driver on the road. And I realized that I have way too often turned from the calm, congenial, unflappable rabbi that you know so well into a raging lunatic when I get behind the wheel of a car. It's embarrassing, but it's true. And after all, here we are at our most sacred time of the year, when we're supposed to confess our personal sins and figure out how to make amends and become better versions of ourselves in the year ahead. So I've been thinking a lot about my driving and what my driving says about being part of a community beyond myself, and how I might transform the time I spend driving in the car every single day into some positive spiritual experience instead. So here it is. This is the possibility to change your life forever. This is how I've turned driving into something much more than simply getting from place A to place B, or a race to see whether I can get to the next intersection faster than the car next to me. It's my formula for what I call driving as a spiritual practice. All you need to change your life forever is to simply follow Rabbi Reuben's rules of the road, because I like the alliteration. Rabbi Reuben's rules of the road are this. Rule number 1, practice patience. Rule number 2, let everyone else win. And rule number 3, be the kind of driver you'd want your kids to grow up to be. So here's my new driving mantra. It's put God first. Put God first. That's PGF, which also stands for patience, gratitude, and forgiveness. Patience, gratitude, forgiveness. Because the most important rule of driving as a spiritual practice is to practice patience. We're all in way too much of a hurry when we're driving, and the truth is, it hardly ever really makes any difference at all when we get to our destination. Here's the truth. If you drive 45 miles an hour instead of 35 miles an hour, which is the speed limit on most of the roads around here, After 5 miles, driving 45 instead of 35, you have saved less than 2 minutes. Less than 2 minutes. And if you're simply willing to let go of that less than 2 minutes, you can change your life forever. You sit back instead of hunching forward. You begin to breathe again. You release more anxiety and stress than you can imagine. Try it for just one day, and you'll see the dramatic difference that it can make in your life. PGF. Put God first. Patience, gratitude, forgiveness. And like any other mantra, I literally say those words to myself while I'm driving. Patience, gratitude, forgiveness. And the lens through which I see every other driver and myself has never been the same. Gratitude that my body still works well enough that I can drive. Gratitude that I live in a country with rules of the road and a car in good enough mechanical condition that it gets me where I want to go. And gratitude for every courteous driver I meet on the road who lets me in and otherwise drives like a mensch, because every time you drive is a mensch opportunity for you as well as for them. Patience, gratitude, and above all else, forgiveness. Forgiveness directed not only at the missteps and upsets and frustrations caused by every other driver you meet on the road, but for my own as well. I actually say out loud, I forgive you. I was going to have you do it, but I won't. I forgive, you can do that on Yom Kippur. I forgive you every time another driver does something that like pushes my button, or is rude or thoughtless or cuts me off or speeds by. Try it. Try it the next time you're coming up, let's see, West Channel Road, wanting to turn up Chautauqua, and oops, someone is in the far right lane, and they just decide, oh, I really wanted to go onto PCH, and so they just stay there and block the road. Next time, just say, I forgive you. Watch what happens. It's like a magic formula, literally. It alters the chemistry in your brain and the emotions reverberating in your body, and it calms your mind. It turns you into the guru of driving in a moment of automotive enlightenment. And most of all, I say I forgive you to myself as well. Every time I do something in the spur of the moment that reverts back to my old driving habits, it literally stops me from speeding. It short circuits my blood pressure beginning to rise, and it feels like a kind of spiritual hug of acknowledgement that I'm only human, and I do make mistakes, and I slip backwards from time to time, and just need a reset. It's like a best-selling author Anne Lamott, who once wrote, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. So Rabbi Reuben's spiritual rules of the road are really simple. Turn your driving every day into an opportunity for spiritual practice and spiritual discipline. And you will definitely become the kind of driver you want your kids to grow up to be. And in conclusion, okay, a final story. Golfers all in their 40s discussed where they should meet for lunch, and finally it was agreed that they would meet at Hooters because the waitresses were young and good-looking and wore really short outfits. 10 years later, in their 50s, the golfing buddies once again discussed where they should meet for lunch, and finally it was agreed they would meet at Hooters because the food and service was so good, and they had lots of televisions to watch the games, and the beer selection was great. 10 years later, in their 60s, the foursome again discussed where they should meet for lunch. Finally, it was agreed they would meet at Hooters because there was plenty of parking and they could dine in peace and it was good value for the money. 10 years later, in their 70s, they discussed where should we meet for lunch. Finally, it was agreed they would meet at Hooters because the restaurant was wheelchair accessible and had a toilet for the disabled. 10 years later, in their 80s, the friends discussed where they should meet for lunch. Finally, it was agreed they would meet at Hooters because they'd never been there before. Couldn't help it. 30,000 people 2,000 people die in their cars every year. Now, I've been driving already, as I said, for over 50 years, and many are driving today well into their 90s. My mother's Rosh Hashanah present for me today on the phone was to tell me, she turned 94 this week, that she's finally agreed to stop driving. So what you do when you get into your car is not only a matter of your emotional and spiritual well-being, it's really, literally, a matter of life and death for you and everyone around you. So when you get into your car tonight, tomorrow, and perhaps for these next 10 days of awe, just try Rabbi Reuben's spiritual rules of the road. PGF. Put God first. Patience, gratitude, forgiveness. And to help remind you, I made 600 of these keychains that say PGF on them, that if you want on the way out, someone should have them out there and you can take them home with you. PGF. Turn your driving every day into an opportunity for spiritual practice. And I guarantee that your life will never be the same.